Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to easily create a scalable multiplayer game with blueprints. No C++ required. If you want a lag-free AAA quality global multiplayer system that is free to use for testing for up to a year, then this is the video for you. To get started, we're going to need to come over and either purchase this plugin, the Gamelift with Blueprints plugin, or this entire package, which is going to be a multiplayer with Blueprints plugin. If you are just looking for the ability to host your games on Amazon dedicated servers, then Gamelift with Blueprints may be enough just for you. But if you want the full multiplayer experience where we're going to set things up such as skill and latency based matchmaking, a party system to invite and join your friends, secure login system with user profiles, and a NoSQL database for storing in-game data, I would recommend purchasing this plugin. It's going to include access to not only Gamelift but also Lambda, DynamoDB, and Amazon Cognito. But we do have the individual available as well. One thing I should go ahead and mention is that the Unreal Engine you use needs to be a source build of the engine. These plugins will not work without the source build of the engine from Epic Games' GitHub repository, located right here. There are lots of video series on YouTube which will take you through the process of getting approved by Epic to gain access to their Git repository and then downloading the source engine code. So you should be able to find one, follow it, and complete this on your own. I am not going to go through this process in this video. Alright, and then the next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and create an AWS account. If you just go to aws.com, you should just be able to find, right when you go to account, you should be able to sign up, create an account. Then we're going to want to go to this IAM, Identity and Access Management, and we're going to go to groups, and we're going to create a new group, and you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it My Group 1. Go to next step, and we're going to give it this administrator access policy, and then now we're at review, and then you can just go ahead and create group. I already have a group, so I'm not going to, but you can just click create group. After you've done that, we're going to go to users. We're going to add a user. You can name it whatever you want and give it programming access and AWS management console access. You can give it a custom password, and this will automatically give it the IAM user change password policy. Next, we're going to go to permissions. We're going to add it to that group we just made, add this user to the group, and that's going to give it that administrator access that we gave it when we created the group. Tags, we're just going to leave it, and then we're at review, and then go ahead and create user. Again, I've already created a user, so I'm not going to, but you're going to click create user. And then if you go to that user and go to secret credentials and click create access key, it's going to give you an access key ID and a secret key ID, and you're going to want to save those somewhere safe because we're going to need those to connect to your AWS console. The next step you're going to want to go ahead and do is download the Amazon Gamelift server SDK and extract it with 7-zip. Just download this, extract it with 7-zip, you'll be good to go. Then go ahead and download the AWS command line installer. Once it's downloaded, have all your options there. Once it's downloaded, you're going to need to configure it to your AWS account. Type AWS configure into PowerShell or command line, and then fill in the information that it asks for. It's going to ask for your access key ID, your secret access key, those two things we got from that user just a second ago, and then your region name and output format. Just leave it as JSON. Region name you can find right here, right when you log in to your AWS. If you just go to the home page, it's right here. Mine says US East 2. And once that's done, we can start getting into your actual project. So okay, so now our next step is going to be to get this plugin that you just purchased installed into our source build of the engine. The first thing we're going to have to do is go into our Epic Games library and install it to the correlating Epic Games engine, so that we'll have a folder that we're able to find it under. So if you're using a source build of 4.22 or 4.23 or 4.24, install the plugin that you purchased to the correlating engine for Epic Games. So for me, I'm using a 4.23 source build of the engine, so I'm going to install it to my 4.23 Epic Games engine. so that it is the correct version. So go ahead, hit install, and let that go. All right, and then our next step is let's go find that plugin that we just downloaded. It's going to be inside your engine, and then plugins, marketplace, and here's mine right here, Cognito DynamoDB Gamelift Lambda plugin. And I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go find my source build of the engine. Same thing, engine, plugins, marketplace, and I'm going to paste it right in here. Alright, and now we're going to need to go ahead and rebuild that engine since we placed that in there. So go ahead and go to your setup.batch file and run as administrator. It should take about a minute, and then go to generate project files.batch, run as administrator, and then after that let's go ahead and open up this UE4 Visual Studio project file. Alright, and then once that is complete, we're going to need to make sure this is in development editor mode, Win64, come over here to UE4 and click build. And then once that finishes, you should get some amount successful. As long as you get 0 failed, you should be good. And then we're going to go back into our engine, binaries, Win64, and let's go ahead and open up the editor and get started. And then once that opens up, if you already have a project built on your engine, you should just be able to open that up. I'm just going to go ahead and open up a blank third-person project for us to get started with, and go ahead and create that. And then once that project goes ahead and opens up, just go to edit, plugins, and make sure your plugin is enabled. It might ask you to restart the project, just go ahead and do that, but make sure whichever plugin you downloaded is enabled. Alright, so one thing we're going to want to go ahead and do before we go any farther in this project is go ahead and make this a C++ project. So we're going to come here, click add new, say new C++ class, and create a character. Just add this to the project, next, create class, and once it's created, you can go ahead and exit out, and we're going to want to generate Visual Studio project files right there so that they're all up to date, and then you can reopen the project back up. Cool. And then we'll get into the blueprint. Alright, so now real quickly, let's go back into the root folder of our project right here, and let's go to the source and go ahead and see if you have a server. You're going to have an editor. You're going to have whatever the name of your project is .target, and whatever the name of your project is editor.target, but check if you have a server. If you do not have a server one here, you're going to need to make a copy of the editor. Go ahead and make a copy of the editor and change the name to the name of your project, server.target.cs, as it is right here. And then go ahead and open up that duplicated, the one you just named to server. And I'm going to show you what you need to change. So everywhere where it says editor, so like Gamelift tutorial editor target, I'm going to change this to server. And where it says Gamelift tutorial editor target, I'm going to change editor to server, and target type.editor, I'm going to change that to server. This is without this, you're not going to be able to, you're not going to have the source to host a dedicated server on Amazon Gamelift. So you need to make sure you have this file in there. Alright, so now that we got those plugins installed into our engine, let's go ahead and set up the blueprint code that we're going to need to get this working locally. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make a new game instance. So go here and search new blueprint class, game instance. You're just going to want to go ahead and create a new game instance. I just named mine, my name, game instance, doesn't really matter. Go inside of it. This is the only thing you're going to want inside of your game instance. It's just on an event shutdown, we're going to destroy. If you're the server, just destroy the server. That's all you're going to want inside. And once you complete that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another blueprint class, and we're going to add a process parameters right here. Just go ahead, select that. Again, I already have mine right here. These functions will be already in there for you. Just call to the parent for all of them. Just make a call to the parent and make sure you go to the health check and also make a call to the parent on the health check. That's all you're going to need to do inside of process parameters. Next thing we're going to do, I made a third person game, so I just used the default third person blueprint game. And so I'm just going to go for my game mode, just go to the third person game mode. And I'm going to add this inside. So on event begin play, make a call to the parent, run a branch, is it the server, and init the SDK so that the Gamelift SDK gets running. You'll get an error on Gamelift if you don't do this, so it'll just say the SDK has not been initialized, so make sure you do that. I've gotten that error, so I know. Then we're gonna, if it is a success, come over here, construct your process parameters, and set the port to the server IP, and check if process ready. Are we ready to go? And run a branch if that was a success. Just a print string. I pretty much print string anytime something goes false with the error message. It's a real easy and good way to debug your stuff, so I highly recommend it. And those are the 3 main blueprints we're going to need. But before we forget, let's go ahead and go into our project settings, and if you go to game instance, make sure that one you just created is your game instance class, and go ahead and make sure your game mode, default game mode, make sure it's set to third person game mode while we're doing it. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and set up our maps. You're going to want to go up here and create new level, create a new empty level, and then you're going to want to save current, and name it entry map or whatever. See, I already have one, so I'm just going to cancel out of that. But you're going to create one like an entry map, and then another same exact thing, tran map, an empty level, and then I'm just going to use as my gameplay map this third person example map. That'll be the map you travel into to actually play the game for now. And you can do the same, or you can just create a default level and travel into that, or whatever map you have, you can travel into whatever map you want. Alright, so now let's go ahead and open up this level blueprint for the entry map, and let's go ahead and set this up for our local test. The code inside the entry map that's going to be able to connect players into a server map together. First thing we're going to do is on event begin play, link it to the parent, and then let's go ahead and create a Gamelift object. We're going to create a Gamelift object so that we're able to connect into your AWS account. So we're going to come off here, make AWS credentials right there, put in your access key ID, put in your secret key, then come down to the client configuration, make AWS client configuration, and for the local test we're going to want to make sure right here our scheme is HTTP, put in your region, and then for the endpoint override I'm going to come right here, do 127.0.0.1 colon port 8080. This is going to connect to your local computer, so just use that as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and promote off of this create Gamelift object. I'm going to promote this to a variable, and then I'm going to create a new variable that I went ahead and called fleet arm. It's a type string, and I'm going to make this into a random, I'm going to create my own fleet that we're going to connect to. Whenever we go online, you'll see that the way these fleets are identified is pretty much through this process. It's going to be fleet dash and then a random assortment, numbers, letters, that identifies that specific fleet. So we're just going to make one right here to use for the local test. Next thing we're going to do is describe game sessions, and Also, just wanted to go ahead and point out, if at any time you're a little confused about what a specific function does, we've tried to do a great job of writing out exactly what it does and what it's able to do, and what plugging in each thing into what can allow you to accomplish. So just go ahead and take a look at this, and this should help with clarification if at any time you're confused. But anyway, we're here on this describe game sessions. Your target's going to be that Gamelift object ref that you made, and we're going to describe game sessions request. We're going to plug in this fleet we made into the AWS resource name, and then we're going to check if that was a success. If it wasn't, let's print string it so we can see where we went wrong. Otherwise, we're going to create a game session because the describe game sessions worked. Again, same target, and off of here, just make create game session request. Again, for the AWS resource name, put in that fleet arm, and let's make an array of the game properties. One more thing is, make sure this maximum player session count is set to something above 0 so that you're able to get players into your game. Otherwise, you won't get an error, but it'll just say you're at your max players. We're going to run if that was a success. False, print string it, see where we went wrong. True, we're going to create a player session to allow a player to be able to join into our game session. So off of the game session result, we're going to break that game session and then break it again, which you can just come here and break. Same thing here, come here, break. And we're going to make a create player session request and plug that into the create player session request. Off of that, we're going to check if it was successful, and if it wasn't, print string what went wrong. If it was true, we're going to come down here off of this create player session. We're going to break it again. We're going to get this IP address, get the port, plug IP address into A, colon in B, port in C, and we're going to link that into the level name. And then you should be good to go. Alright, and now that we're done with the code here, let's go ahead and set up our maps in our project settings. So here I am, just search maps, and then we're going to set these up. The editor startup map can be whatever you want. It really doesn't matter for this. That's just for you in the editor. The game default map, you need to make it the entry map. Transition map, make it the tran map. The server default map is the third person example map. Essentially what's going to happen is all the clients are going to come into this game default map. They're going to enter the entry map, which is going to take them to that code so they can figure out to join that port to this server default map on that specific game session. Then come down to this packaging, and you need, under list of maps to include in a packaged build, you need to add those 3 maps that we're going to use. This third person's example map, tran map, and entry map. All of them are going to start with game, and then it's the location of where they're located, like how these are in maps and then entry map. So I have maps, entry map, maps, tran map. And then for third person blueprint, go to third person blueprint, maps, third person example map. And now that all that is done, we can go ahead and build our server. So let's go ahead and do that. You're going to want to go Window, Project Launcher. I'm going to build it with Windows. I'm going to make another tutorial shortly of how to build a Linux server, and so you can build it through that. But for now, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Windows. We're going to come up here and we're going to go Windows Server. Make sure you're on the advanced option. If you're not on the advanced, you're going to have no idea what to do. And you have to do by the book for the Windows Server. And then go ahead and launch it. Alright, and then when that finishes, you should get a build successful in the log at the bottom. And you can go find that, go into your game, go into your project right here, and go to saved, staged builds. You should have your Windows Server right saved in here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go find those files we downloaded for the Gamelift local at the beginning of this video, and I have mine right here, and we're going to get to right here. And then you're going to copy this and change the directory so that we're looking at this folder in a command prompt or PowerShell. This, yeah, we're inside this folder. And then I went ahead, pulled up my directory, made sure I was in the right place. I was, so here it's showing. And we're gonna run that Gamelift local the jar file. We're gonna go ahead and run that. And so you need to do java -jar Gamelift local.jar, and then you should get this to pull up. And then we're going to go back into our server. And we're going to come right here. And I'm going to create a shortcut. Properties. And I'm going to make this -log. Apply. OK. And then I'm going to run that. And we should get a healthy right here. You want this healthy. So it's working. So that's cool. And now we're ready to go back to this project launcher. Go to default. I'm just going to leave it with by the book, and let's launch that. And then it should pull up. And then once we finish building the client, it's going to go ahead and pull up for you. And you've successfully used Gamelift Local. So now let's move on to the real thing. Alright, and now that we got Gamelift Local working, let's go ahead and test it to put it on the real thing. The first thing we're going to want to do is go back into our entry map, and we're going to need to change some of these blueprint nodes so that they work online. Some of it will still be the same, but some of it's going to be a little bit different. So create your Gamelift object again, just like we did before. Put in your AWS credentials. You can just copy that down from the local version. Make sure in this AWS client configuration you change the scheme to HTTPS and get rid of the endpoint override. We're not going to need that anymore because we're not connecting it locally to yourself. I went ahead, set the variable again, and then search for game sessions, and the target's going to be that Gamelift object, and we're going to need a new string variable. And I called it fleet alias name, and we're going to plug that into the make search game sessions request. This we're going to update later. It's going to be the name of your alias that we're going to get online, but for now you can just leave it blank. Make sure that's a success. Run a branch. If it fails, print string it so that you know where you went wrong. If it's true, run it off to another branch. On this search game session result, we're going to check if there are any game sessions currently happening, because if there are, we're going to just want to join them, and if there's not, we're going to need to make our own game session ourselves. So off of true, so if it is 0, we're going to have to go create a game session, and the target is that Gamelift object, and make create game session request. Again, make sure you set the maximum player session count to something greater than 0 so that you can have players join. Plug in that fleet alias name, and then run a branch off that to make sure that that was successful. If anything went wrong, we're going to print string it so that we know where we went wrong, and if it's true, we're going to create a player session. Again, that target is that Gamelift object that we created, that reference to that variable, and we're going to break the create game session result, get that game session ID, and plug it into the AWS resource name so that we can connect this player session into that game session. And we're going to give just a random configuration of numbers, letters to be the player ID. And off of that, we're going to check again if that create player session was successful. And if it was, we're going to go ahead and open the level. And you're going to want to come down here and break that player session, get the IP address, and append it with a colon and the port. So IP address in A, colon in B, port in C, plug it into the options, and open the level. Then if we come back over here and there was already a game session, it's not equal to 0, then all we're going to have to do is create a player session because we already have a game session. So again, the Gamelift object, that's going to be our target. Same, break this game session of 0, so we get the array of the first of the array of game sessions. We're going to break that and get that game session ID. Again, give a random player ID and check if that was successful. False, we want to see where our error went wrong, and if it was true, we want to go ahead and open that level. Same idea, IP address A, B's a colon, port into C, and plug it into level name. And everything should work well for you. Alright, so now one final thing we're going to set up so that our player sessions are linked to our Gamelift interface once we get in there, so that Gamelift can accept the player sessions when they come in and can store them accurately inside of the game sessions. The first thing we're gonna make some changes to this entry map real quick, and the first thing we're gonna need to do is make a new variable that's of type of your game instance, and we're gonna put it right here after the event, after the parent call after the event began play. We're gonna check if that server instance is valid. If not, we're gonna cast to your server instance and set that as the variable so that we have a reference of your game instance. After we do that, we're going to go ahead and go into your game instance and create a new variable that's of type string called player session ID. And you're just going to create a variable and do nothing with it inside the game instance. We're going to go back to the entry map after that, and we are going to set this to that player session ID after we created these new player sessions. So up here right before the open level, I'm going to set player session ID in the game instance, and then also down here we're going to set the player session ID in the game instance to that player session ID. And then we're going to go into our third person character or whatever character you're going to use when you're actually in the game. And we're going to run an event begin play. We're going to run a branch, check if it's the server, make sure it's not the server, make sure it's a user trying to play the game. We're going to run a sequence and make sure the controllers equals the player controller. And again, we're going to do that same thing. We're going to get a reference of our game instance right here. So check if it's valid. If it's not, we're going to set it. And then we're going to come down off of that sequence and secondly run this branch, which is going to run a function called set player session ID that is going to be reliable and replicated to the server. So whenever you create this function, and we have it right here, make sure replicates, run on server, and let's make it reliable. And then once we have that done, we're going to go ahead and set up this function. So we're going to make sure the player session isn't equal to null. If that's true, we're going to set the player session ID equal to that variable saved in our game instance that we set in the game entry map. And we're going to describe player sessions, make describe player sessions request, hook up the player session ID. We're going to make sure that describe player sessions run a branch, make sure it's successful. If it's not, we're going to print the error string, figure out where we went wrong. If it is, we're going to run a for each loop of all of the player sessions, and we're going to break each element of that loop each time and get the player session ID, make sure check if it equals, so that we find this person. Check if it's equal to the player session ID that we have stored in our game instance. If that's true, We're going to make sure the status is reserved because we created that player session, so it should be reserved. And we're going to accept the player session. And it's going to be for that player session ID that we have. And that'll come in handy later so that you're able to track exactly the right amount of people are within each game session on the AWS Gamelift interface. And then the last thing we're going to go ahead and add as well is on an event end play, we're going to remove that player session. When the server, if the server true, we're going to remove that player session. That player, with that specific ID that's stored in your game instance. And we're going to and if you're a client, we're going to reopen the entry map for you so that you're back at your first opening map, like when you open the game. So then after we change the code inside of the entry map level blueprint, we're going to go ahead and go back into our project. So go to where your project is, go into the saved folder, go to staged builds, and you're going to have this Windows Server and Windows No Editor. Now you could go ahead and delete them, but I'm going to go ahead and save them for now. These were from our local build, so I'm just going to go ahead and make these old so that I have references to them if anything goes wrong, so I know I have a working version of it. But I'm just going to go ahead and make these old so that when I build ones, they won't get replaced, essentially. And now that all that is done, we can go ahead and build our server. So let's go ahead and do that. You're going to want to go Window, Project Launcher. We're going to come up here and we're going to go Windows Server. Make sure you're on the advanced option. If you're not on the advanced, you're going to have no idea what to do. And you have to do by the book for the Windows Server. And then go ahead and launch it. Okay, so now that our server is finished building, there's one very important step that we need to do when compiling our server through Windows. There's 3 files that we're going to need to add that I will link you to in the description below so that you can give Amazon access to your server file. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go to our project and to our Windows server right here. And we're going to need to place these files in there. So I have them right here. It's this Windows required files. I'm just going to copy them and go back to my server and paste them right in here. Alright, so now that we got these required files placed inside of our Windows Server folder, we can go ahead and begin our upload of our server to Gamelift. So let's either open a command prompt or Windows PowerShell. I'm going to go ahead and go with Windows PowerShell. And I'm going to open up this notepad document, which is going to have the AWS command that I'm going to need to complete this upload. So I'm going to put this text in the description below so that you guys can follow it, but so that you guys can use it and then just change your build route so that it's to your project. But that'll make it a lot simpler for you. For the Windows build, you're going to start with AWS Gamelift upload build. Operating system Windows 2012. Amazon uses Windows 2012, which is why we needed those required files that we just placed in there. And then you're going to find your build route. So like for mine, I just come to my Windows Server folder, copy this, paste it right here for my build route. You can name it whatever you want and build version so that you can like build up once you have more and more build versions. And then add your region at the end. And I'm going to go ahead, copy this. I'm going to open up my PowerShell and I'm going to paste it, and then it'll start. It'll take about 30 to 40 seconds before it'll begin, and then it'll start uploading for you. This is uploading. I wanted to go ahead and let you guys know that this right here was for Windows, and I plan on next time doing one for Linux. You're not going to need those required files, but Linux kind of has its own system what you're going to have to do. But I plan to make this tutorial to show you how to use a Linux server instead of a Windows server in my next video. Alright, so once that finishes uploading, you should get right here that it's successfully uploaded to AWS Gamelift. It's going to give you a build ID, and then if you come into your AWS Gamelift interface and go to your dashboard, you might have to refresh, but you should be able to see this is my test my build version 1.0. It's right here. And now we are ready to create a fleet. So let's just go to create fleet. After our server build is successfully uploaded to Gamelift, we're going to need to set up a fleet. Fleets are your hosting resources in the form of a set of EC2 instances. To host game servers on Amazon Gamelift, deploy a fleet with either a custom game server or real-time servers. The size of a fleet depends on the number of instances you give it, and you can adjust fleet size to meet player demand either manually or by auto-scaling. Most games in production require more than one fleet. You need multiple fleets if, for example, you want to host players in more than one region, or if you have 2 or more versions of your game server build or script. In this tutorial though, I'm just going to set up one simple fleet so that we can get our game running. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and give this a name. I'm just going to call it Gamelift and say let's test this game. I'm going to leave it as on demand, and I'm going to select a build. I'm going to select that test my build that I just built, and I'm going to stick with the free tier for the instance type. Then for my launch path, I'm going to go to my Windows server. And this game right here is going to essentially be your Windows server. So you're going to want to go AWS Gamelift, binaries, Win64, and copy this. Or yours won't be AWS Gamelift unless that's what you named it, but I think you get the point. Alright, let's copy this. Oh my gosh. And then one more. I'm going to make sure, just so I don't type anything wrong, go to properties, copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and give it 20 concurrent processes and click check. Then for my max concurrent game session activation, I'm going to limit it to 20 per instance, and I'm going to leave that activation timeout at 60 seconds. We're going to need to add some port settings. So I'm going to add UDP and TCP settings here. And the IP address range, I'm just going to leave it open to anyone. And I'm going to choose full protection and go ahead and initialize that fleet. Oh, let me just make sure. Hold on. Forgot to put that this was an executable. And now initialize it. And it'll say new right now, and then it'll switch to downloading, and it'll go through, it'll go downloading, activating, validating, and then activating, and then it'll be active. Alright, so now that our fleet has begun initializing, we are going to set up an alias. An alias is used to abstract a fleet designation. Fleet designations tell Amazon Gamelift where to search for available resources when creating new game sessions for players. By using aliases instead of specific fleet IDs, you can more easily and seamlessly switch player traffic from one fleet to another by changing the alias's target location. And in here, we're just going to give it a name. Just call it Miles and say, let's test. And select my fleet that is downloading and configure alias. In the future, I plan to make some tutorials going more in depth on using fleets and aliases, along with showing you how to use queues and matchmaking configurations. But for now, if you want more information on how these things work, you can read up on them on Amazon's Gamelift documentation. Finally, the last step that we're going to need to do before building our client is we're going to need to take this alias ID and copy it and go back into our project and find that fleet alias name string variable earlier, and we're going to paste in that alias ID and then compile and save. Alright, and now our final step is we're going to go ahead and build the client. So let's go back to our project launcher, And let's go to default. You can do by the book or on the fly. I'm going to do by the book for now and launch it. And when this happens, it should pull up you inside the game when it's done. Alright, so now this process has completed and I am successfully inside of the server map. And I'm playing around. So we were able to successfully upload to Gamelift and get it working. Alright, and then if you want to go ahead and package your game up and send it over to your friends, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that real quick. So you're going to go to your project, go to Saved, go to Staged Builds, go to that Windows No Editor that we just made, and we're going to compress this. We're going to send this to a compressed zip, and then once that is done, you can go ahead and send that over to whoever you want to play your game with. And once they get it, they can extract it with 7-zip. And then once you just have this Windows No Editor, open it, go to AWS Gamelift, Binaries, Win64, and then that will be the executable to run your game right there. We have also created a plugin that can be paired with the Scalable Multiplayer with Only Blueprints plugin that allows you to set up advanced matchmaking for your multiplayer game, just like AAA games, For Honor, and Fortnite with Only Blueprints. That plugin is called Account System and User Data with Only Blueprints. But if you haven't purchased either of those two we also sell a package of both of them at a discount. This one is called Scalable Multiplayer and Advanced Matchmaking with Only Blueprints. So if you want your game to have the ultimate scalable multiplayer experience with advanced matchmaking based on skill or latency, I would recommend purchasing this plugin. I am working on creating tutorial videos right now to show you guys how to set up a full matchmaking system, and those videos should be released shortly. Also, if you want to only purchase the Amazon Gamelift plugin now and then later decide you want to integrate Cognito as well, just buy Account System and User Data with Only Blueprints once you have already purchased Scalable Multiplayer with Only Blueprints. And then send us an email and we will give you access to the plugin that contains both. And I will provide the link for where you can purchase these plugins in the description below.